We all know who the most interesting man in the world is, but is Deion Sanders the riskiest coach in college football? We're going to talk about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Buffs.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Buffs. I'm your host, Kevin Borba, and joining me today, special guest, Spencer McLaughlin. Spencer, thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking some Colorado football, some Coach Prime, but before we do, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Buffs your first listen every day. We are available wherever you get your podcast. Okay, to preview today's episode, we're going to be talking about, is Coach Prime the riskiest coach in college football? He's putting all hands on deck. He's playing all those cards that he's got in the transfer portal and beyond. We're going to talk about the possible Jim Mora, Coach Prime beef, even though they're on opposite sides of the college football spectrum. And then we're just going to talk about Coach Prime's methods and the business of college football and why it's not surprising that this is happening. It's just he's more vocal about it. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Spencer, talk to me a little bit about Coach Prime's transfer portal process, and do you think that's the riskiest move in college football? Because me and John the other day discussed if Colorado's now a boom or bust team up in year one.
I don't think I'd describe them as a boom or bust team. I mean, that depends on what your expectations are for boom or bust. I don't think we have over-unders yet on their win total for 2023. I can't wait for that to come out because I imagine one way or another it's going to send people into a frenzy. My guess is it would be like 4.5, and if it's less than 4, I think people will go nuts. If they were to come out and go crazy instead of like 5.5 or 6, I think the other side of the spectrum would go pretty crazy. But I actually don't think Coach Prime is the riskiest hire in college football. There are some risky elements in that if it doesn't go well, I think the perception of your school can be worse than if it doesn't go well with a different coach because of all the attention you have. But part of the investment in Coach Prime is Coach Prime, right? It's the brand of having him there and the awareness he brings to your school. And that to me, at some level, makes him a very safe hire. Like let's say he lasts at Colorado for 3 years, but he never wins a lot of games, right? Let's say he never gets above 6 wins. Let's say he wins 4 games this year, 6 games, regresses back to 3 somehow, which I doubt, but let's just say hypothetically that happens. Regresses back to 3, and Colorado decides that it's time to move on. Do you think the Colorado football program is in a better place in that scenario in 3 years than they were before they hired him? My argument would be yes, because you now have an increased level of awareness. You are now a more attractive destination. You've had more high quality players go through your program than you were otherwise going to have. And you gain a level of relevance and interest. So I think that, the floor for hiring Coach Prime is kind of high in that sense, and that he's automatically going to put you on the map more than you had. Because think about this, Kevin. Had you heard or ever watched or considered or discussed or talked about Jackson State football before he got there? I had not, right? HBCUs don't have a huge presence. I've seen a game every now and then on ESPN floating around here, but I didn't know the name. But now, if you ask me to name an HBCU football program, I'm going to Jackson State. That's the one that I know first. There are several others, but that's the one that is now the most well-known. So I think the floor is high at some level, but that doesn't mean the ceiling is infinitely high as well, because like I said, there is a downside to it, right? If it doesn't work in 3 years and, the noise will start to become a distraction, the noise and attention that he brings will start to become a negative. It can be a drawback on your program. I think that if it doesn't work, there is an inherent level of risk because it will look worse, right? So I think the highs are higher with him. The lows could be a little bit lower, but I do think there's an inherent level of safety in hiring him, and that you're bringing him in, especially at a place like Colorado, to bring attention to your program. I think it's different if he were to go to Florida State, right? Everybody knows Florida State. They've won a national championship in the last 10 years. They're an established brand in college football. They're in a Power 5 conference and all that sort of stuff. I think it'd be different if he were there. But for a school like Colorado, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think he seems risky right now in terms of not his hiring, but like the process he's using with all these transfers. But I think people forget that this is like a one-time thing. Like he's not going to be taking in 70 new players every single season that he's at Colorado. It's just he has to do that right now. I think the national media kind of the media, just the media. I feel like they're
It's a great thing to just hurl insults at vaguely.
yeah,
You don't have to name a specific outlet or
no.
individual. You could just say the media do this, and
Well,
it's completely safe for guys like us.
I think they're really pushing the narrative of like Colorado's taking in 60, 70 new players, and it's going to be risky. It's going to be, is Coach Prime going to do it? And it's like, this isn't an every year thing. This is just going to happen the one time. He's trying to get, and rightfully so. I feel like the team went 1-11 last year. I think the human element part of it is kind of like, oh, that's sad. But then again, looking at it from like the business aspect, which we'll talk about later, all the guys that have left outside of Montana, Lamonius Craig, maybe three other guys, all these guys are getting group of 5 offers, FCS offers. Like there's not many Power 5 offers floating around for these guys, most of the guys that have departed the roster. And so it was just a necessary step. I think Coach Prime was very vocal about doing it, and which is why he seems more risky than others. I think other coaches do this in silence, which we'll again get to later. But I think his 1 year process will be kind of risky because honestly, I think all these transfers is either going to like exceed expectations or it's going to not exceed, like it's going to fizzle, I guess. But I looked up the win total, and over at FanDuel, our good friends and sponsors at FanDuel, they have them at 3.5. That is their win total, which if I was a betting man in a legalized betting state, I would take the over. I would take the over on that.
I think I think that number is as much a reflection of Colorado's schedule as it is how much they have grown roster wise and the talent they have from last year to this year. I think you could put them on a different Pac-12 team schedule, and that over-under would creep up at least to 4, if not 4.5. But the 3.5 number, I think, is indicative of the fact that, they've got Colorado State. They should be fine there. But TCU just went to the national championship game. Are they a pullback team? Yes. But a pullback team that just went to the national championship, albeit very fortuitously, as we saw against Georgia, but still got to that level, played some really good football, beat Michigan, and played very well in that game. That's still an 8 to 9 win team, most likely 7 at the bare minimum, I would think. And then Nebraska is on there in the same spot as Colorado. Now, getting Nebraska at home, I think, is advantageous. But then you look at their Pac-12 schedule, Kevin, and it's just not very, like, you open at Autzen Stadium against Oregon, one of the best home field advantages in the Pac-12. And correct me if I'm wrong, they have to go at Utah this year as well.
I believe so. Yeah.
They've got Utah. You've got USC in there.
I know for a fact they have like all of the good, like they have like 4 of the top 5 Pac-12 teams on their schedule.
Yeah, they've got a pretty tough go of it. I think they miss Oregon State. Is the team they miss? We should probably just pull this stuff up.
Here it is. They go at TCU versus Nebraska versus Colorado State, and then Pac-12 play starts, like you said, at Oregon versus USC. They travel to Tempe to play Arizona State. They host Stanford. They travel to Pasadena, which, I mean, I don't think that's going to be a tough advantage there for the Buffs. I think UCLA has one of the weaker fan support systems. Oregon State is their homecoming. Senior day is Arizona, and then they finish going to Pullman and then Utah. So they finish on back-to-back toughish road games.
So they miss Washington and they miss Cal. Cal, a much more winnable game. Washington, a less winnable game for the Buffs this year. But that schedule is pretty darn tough. And look, Buffs fans are, I don't know. I don't have a super good feel for what their expectations are in year one. I think 3.5 is a pretty fair number. I think if that schedule were easier, like if you swapped Oregon State and Cal, Like if you played Cal instead, you'd probably only play one Bay Area school though. So getting Stanford is a help there. But there are ways that schedule could be a bit easier, and it's a brutal start too. Like there is a realistic world, and I bet you Colorado fans will hate me for saying this, where Colorado starts 1-4. Right. Yeah. TCU. Now Nebraska, I think at home, Folsom Field's gonna be rocking. Rocking.
And be buzzing
for that game because you'll have played at TCU. Even if you lose that game, which they probably will, you don't have the first game at home under your belt yet, and it'll be that one, right? That'll be a sold-out crowd. They'll be buzzing. And Nebraska's a rebuilding team too, not like TCU. But if they lose those two games and they start 1-2, then you have at Oregon, probably going to be a loss, and then you host USC. That's also probably a loss. Winning one of those TCU or Nebraska games would be pretty big. But the question for Colorado, Kevin, as you know, is like what is the expectation actually going to be with all the transfers that they've brought in? And I agree with you, it won't be at the volume that it has been this year going forward because they won't have as much rebuilding to do, and they'll actually recruit good high school kids who can develop into starting caliber players as well, guys like Cormani McLean and others, Dylan Edwards as well. I think that there's still going to be a very portal heavy team. Like, look at USC and look at UCLA. USC just brought in two huge transfers on the defensive line, a big one on the offensive line as well. And every school, I think, of notoriety is going to use the portal in a pretty significant way. And USC and UCLA, they have been kind of stalwarts in, high school recruiting. Okay, UCLA especially, who Colorado is obviously a lot closer to in the football sense than USC in terms of, program pedigree and success. They're almost exclusively going after big time prospects in the portal. Like UCLA has had top 10 transfer portal classes or top 15 each of the last couple of years. So I do think you could still see 20 to 25 kids in the portal to Colorado every year. Not at this level, but it could be that.
Which would only be half the number they're bringing in this year because that's just how crazy this is. But I think it's going to be a risky experiment. I think a lot of the portal talent he's getting is really good. There's some unproven guys, but we'll find out as we move on. Guys, if you're looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all the sugar and calories, then you need the best tasting protein bar ever built. You got to try this. If you're like me and you want to make healthier snack choices, but you don't want to compromise on taste, I've got just the thing for you. Built Bars and Built Puffs. Built Bars are healthy and taste amazing. Seriously, they taste so amazing you won't think they're good for you. You got to try this. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real dark chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is they are healthy, only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't have to wait to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering Built bars at Built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club while you still get your specialty flavors still at Built.com. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate bar, or coconut puff. If you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter, puff, and churro puff. You could thank me later. So many good flavors. I know they just released a new one. So much excitement going on with Built, but not as much excitement as there is with Colorado and just the overall Coach Prime experience. The other day, there was and I'm sure all of you talked about this and saw it on social media, a player from Colorado who had entered the portal was claiming that Colorado was not giving him access to his film, which Colorado eventually responded with yesterday saying that everybody that transferred out, you can have access to your film. But he said he wasn't shading Coach Prime and the staff, but it kind of came off as that because he didn't have any film to use. I don't know. I don't know why you take to social media to say you're not shading someone, but then like it goes viral. And I don't know. I feel like you had to know that was going to happen. Either way, Jim Mora, former UCLA coach and current UConn coach, very, very pleased with his work over there at UConn, tweeted, "Any coach that wouldn't allow a transfer to access film is operating from a place of complete paranoia. You really believe an opponent can gather info from random clips. Part of the job of a college coach, college in all caps, and which I talked about yesterday on yesterday's episode. I think Coach Prime is treating this like an NFL job because that's what he knows. Part of the job of a college coach is to advocate for your student athletes current and past. So friend of the show, Josh Newberg, tweeted, Jim Mora isn't a fan of Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffs withholding film of their players. And then Jim Mora responded to the tweet and said, well, that's certainly not true, Josh. I'm a huge fan of Deion Sanders and have you got a typo though, and have no respected and admire him for years. I've never indicated otherwise and doubt I ever will. He's a good man. I also know he is allowing film to be used. I've seen it. Please don't create a false narrative where one doesn't exist. You talked about this before the show. Is this an instance of backsliding, backtracking? Just whoops, I didn't mean for that to go viral. What do you think? Yeah, I think that's his answer right there. I think we can move on.
Yeah, I don't see how that's anything but a backtrack from Jim Mora, because I'm not aware of another coach who was in the midst of that sort of controversy, by the way. Also, quick side note, Kevin, great smooth transition from the ad read back into the segment, smooth like the 100% real chocolate Built bars are covered in. So I think that Mora kind of got himself into hot water a bit and didn't want to. I don't have a problem with him taking a stand on something if he feels that, you know, another college coach, be it Coach Prime or anybody else, is not doing something that he feels in the best interests of the student athletes at the respective university. And look, it's different in college sports because you're dealing with kids, and everyone can talk about, oh, it's like the NFL now. We got a 12-team playoff coming, which I hate, and you know, NIL, and it's the professionalization of college sports, and it's free agency, and it's all this sort of stuff. But there is still education is still involved here, right? These are still kids. We have not deemed them fully grown adults yet. So I think him, you know, kind of feeling that protective nature is kind of normal. I think it's kind of normal, and at some level, you know, him walking it back was probably him getting into was getting into the hot water a bit, and people coming after him, and then he just kind of wanted to get out of it. But it's like, dude, we saw the tweet. We all, it's like that progressive becoming
Josh screenshotted it too. It wasn't like a quote tweet. He screenshot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that progressive becoming your parents commercial when the guy's walking by with blue hair and Dr. Rick is asking him to not say anything. He's like, we all see it. We all see it. It's like, dude, we all see the tweet. I think it's pretty clear who you're referencing there. My understanding is not super insightful on, you know, whether or not it's commonplace for a coach to say, no, we're not going to let you access practice film anymore.
I was told it is. And this is what
we lost Kevin for a moment. Hopefully Kevin gets back. I'll try and carry the show in the meantime in Kevin's absence for all you Buffs fans out there. I could use this time to plug my show Locked On Pac-12, but that would seem self-serving.
We're back. I'm glad you were able to see something, because my screen just went black. Was I on the screen?
You were frozen. You were like a pixelated, frozen little face there, and I was
love that for me.
Yeah, we were adapting and rolling with it live, but it gave me an opportunity to
too far into the episode.
Plug my own show, so you know it's all good.
I love that for you. Plug it. But what I was saying is, it's on the players themselves. You kind of, if you're planning to enter the portal, which I imagine that a majority of these guys knew or could have sensed that Coach Prime was going to be like, hey, the portal's open. Like, I imagine they had to have at least some sort of self-awareness that obviously, like, one guy said he'd only had one meeting with Coach Prime, and it was when he was imploring him to transfer. You have to imagine if Coach Prime never talks to you, you're low on the depth chart, that he probably, I don't want to say wants you to leave, but I mean, he's showing you the door without showing you the door. And so I think you need to have a plan. And it just sounds like some of these guys didn't have a plan, which is, I don't know if that's more so on them or more so on the people that's giving them advice. I don't know, but they need to, I feel like Jim Mora kind of needs to realize that, one, if you ever tweet anything about Coach Prime, the Buffs fan base is going to come out of the woodwork for you. They do not like that disrespect. Two,
nature of the beast.
It was just a weird, because Jim Mora is not the most, like, he has a little checkered history of coming at student athletes too. If I remember correctly, there was a little Josh Rosen dragging tour by Jim Mora back when Josh Rosen was at UCLA and all that. Yeah, he had some issues there, and I just feel like it's weird to go out of your way to call out another coach and then backtrack, like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. Okay, well, interesting.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what he's thinking on with the initial statement or with the backtrack? Like, did you
What was
think
the
that?
goal?
Yeah. What was the goal? I'm not entirely sure, but he's not the only guy to have said, "Wow, it's ridiculous that Coach Prime isn't letting them, access film or stuff like this." And when I hear that, there are other schools that operate that way. Once you're in the portal, they won't let you go back, and you got to get it before you, or something like that. I just wonder if it's one of those instances where if it was anybody but Coach Prime or Nick Saban or Lane Kiffin, one of these big names, big media figures, big personalities, if it wasn't one of those guys, would this really be a major story? Like,
If it was Jim Mora.
do we think there are transfer portal players who have complained about something with regards to the school that they are departing? Is this Colorado player? I don't remember who it was. Is this guy the only one to have ever said this about a school or lodge a public complaint on Twitter about the school's not doing this or they're not doing? Is he the only one to ever do it? I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's probably not, but because it's Coach Prime, it can create some headlines pretty quickly, which doesn't mean that, one person or another isn't doing something that he shouldn't be. But I just, the whole thing to me feels really, really overblown.
People love to watch him, but they also love to take jabs at him. And I think this was like one of those passive aggressive jabs, if you will. Like when you go to a family event and like one of your aunts or uncles says something to you where they're like, "Oh, I see you haven't been up to anything lately," or like something like that, where it's like they're
Or
like
make a comment on your boyfriend or girlfriend, like,
yeah,
"Oh,
they're like
are you
trying to
are
make
you still with the person with no job or something?"
yeah, they're like trying to make conversation, but they're just firing a shot at you. Either way, that's what it felt like to me. We're gonna move on, and we're gonna have to go a little quick on this last episode, or last segment. But before we do, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Buffs your first listen every day. Everydayers, I appreciate you guys. On Monday we'll be talking about transfers. Colorado's probably going to add 3 or 4 more. They've added 4 in the past 2 days, 3 days, and so we're going to talk about that on Monday. Probably, I would imagine that number is going to continue to grow. But right now, we're just going to continue to talk about this business side of college football, and I'll go first just because I know Spencer, you want to close us out with a bang. I think people realize, and this is why Coach Prime is being criticized so heavily. Everything he does is broadcasted on his son's YouTube channel. Everything he says is not, I guess, like PR certified, if you will. Like your local PR person would not be like, "Yes, please go on the Pat McAfee show and laugh about the 40 plus players in the portal," and be like, "That's it." Like Nick Saban would be like, "I'm not aware, I don't know," or something like that. Coach Prime is vocal. He's always on camera, and he's a quick emerging African American coach. And those are the 3 things why people, I think, are a little weary of like what he's doing. He's taken college football by storm, and he's doing it differently. I think all of his methods are stuff that like Nick Saban, Steve Sarkisian at Texas, Lane Kiffin, name a program and they do it. They're just not publicizing it. And I think this is the new college football. It's just people aren't really used to a coach being like, "I want this to happen." What do you think?
Well, the other side of it too is I think all this stuff gets amplified, for better or worse, depending on who you are, because we haven't seen any football yet outside of the spring game, right? Which,
Right.
provides tidbits, insights, player breakdowns, all that sort of stuff. But I think the conversation about Coach Prime changes dramatically when games actually start getting played. Once you have results to go off of, the way you talk about a coach completely changes, because so far, all we've had to go off of with Coach Prime is a lot of good stuff for Colorado, a lot of talented transfers, a lot of transfers, setting a clearly defined culture. Whether you like it or not, that's up to you. But he's got a clear vision. He's bringing in players. He's recruiting high school kids well. He's recruiting portal kids well. The spring game is a big success. That's what we've had to go off of so far. So this time of year, it's really easy, I think, to get too zeroed in on stuff that in the grand scheme of things doesn't really matter. Like, is Colorado's program in complete disarray because one kid was upset he wasn't able to get his transfer portal footage? Probably not, right? Like, that's not indicative of some huge, larger problem. You can make it out to be that. Or, how about the string of decommitments, right? Kids from Jackson State who came in with him, transferring out, high school kid decommitting, players leaving the portal, all that sort of stuff. You know what that sounds like to me? All that noise. What's happening to every other relevant college football program in America
That's a
right
good
now?
point. And I think
Georgia just had Bear Alexander transfer to USC. Is Georgia in decline? Georgia can't keep big recruits. He was a good, productive player. Why didn't he stay there? Like, I think you can really, really get too far into the weeds on this sort of stuff. And it's important to be able to pull back and say, okay, yes, this is happening here. And yes, this is new for Colorado to have players who might be good decommit or decide to leave. But, well, players who are good leaving, that's not new for Colorado, unfortunately, the last couple of years. But at this volume,
these guys are being encouraged to leave. These guys don't want to leave. Most of the
right.
time.
Yeah. And I think that's a part of it as well. But there are so many other programs in America, whether it's Alabama, Georgia, USC, or just go down the list. Just go down the list, and you're going to find kids decommit. Take Oregon, for instance, right? My beloved Ducks had 5-star quarterback Dante Moore verbally committed for the longest time. Kenny Dillingham goes to Arizona State. He was Dante's primary recruiter. He ends up flipping to UCLA at the very last moment. It was a bummer for Oregon. Is that indicative that Oregon's like if that happened to Coach Prime, the headlines everywhere would be, is Coach Prime a fraud? Is the program in decline? Was this a failure or whatnot? No one's asking that about Dan Lanning at Oregon. Like this player movement, that's just what happens now. Whether you're talking about decommitments or transfers away, that's just what this is. You don't have to like it. I understand.
He's Coach Prime.
I understand.
He draws in it's like LeBron, kind of. Like, what does this do to LeBron's legacy? It's like every single thing that happens to Coach Prime is like, what does it do to his Colorado legacy? It's like they haven't even taken
he doesn't have a legacy.
They haven't even taken the field in the same uniforms yet.
No.
Like they're like, let's dial it back. And two, I wanted to touch on something else. And it reminds me of, and I feel like his recruiting strategy of hitting Florida hard and hitting Texas hard and all of this, he has the culture for, and I think you brought it up, his culture is very underrated. Colorado is a much different program. And I saw this multiple times last year. I saw TikToks from players joking about losing. I saw TikToks about joking about Coach Prime telling them to hit the portal. They were using that little boat meme where they're like sailing off onto the open ocean or whatever. And Coach Prime is changing the culture. I think people forget that this team went 1-11 and they kind of acted like it. If we're being completely honest, on social media, they were just like always whatever. They would show up to every game. It didn't seem like they were that dialed in. But he's got the culture to rebuild it. And it's not going to be like Nebraska's. When Nebraska tried to target Florida, Scott Frost didn't have the culture in place. And so I think 7 of his 14 Floridian recruits got kicked off the team. Coach Prime, that's not happening. And I think he has the culture to kind of control all of the narratives, because there's going to be a ton of narratives about him and the team. What do you think?
I don't think he can control every narrative, because narratives are going to be written about him one way or the other.
He could calm him down, though. Like he could keep everybody dialed in.
Yeah, he could. I think the biggest way to calm people down is to, like I was saying, win football games. Like if you come out and win 4 football games this year, guess what? That's a successful season for Colorado. And so if that happens, right, the negativity, I mean, people are still going to find a way to spin things in a negative light. It's just kind of in our nature now. It's what social media is. And look, it's a useful tool for us, of course, but like there are things about it I strongly dislike. And the biggest thing is not just the instant gratification that it ingrains into people's minds, but negativity thrives on the internet, right? I was talking to my dad a while back, and he was telling me how like I was talking about my shows and the play-by-play broadcasts that I do for Southern Utah and whatnot. And I was like, oh yeah, I know one of my favorite feelings is when someone comes up to me and says, hey, I love listening to you call a game. You do a really, really great job. It makes me feel really good and very proud of whatnot. And he said, yeah, it should, because people are 7 times more likely to give a negative comment than a positive one. Like that's the, and again, I'm not sure exactly where he got that from, but I completely, I'm sure I could go find a study to back that claim up. My dad's not a guy who says things evidence free. So I feel like when you get to the point where you start actually winning football games, things are going to quiet down. But when negativity is just able to thrive so easily, and people are so much more like, I think they've done this on Yelp too, like a positive Yelp review. One good Yelp review is more valuable to your company or to your product or whatever, then like 4 negative reviews hurt it, because people are more likely to say something negative. And if they have a positive reaction, they're more likely to just say nothing. They just want to go about their business. They just want to go about their day and enjoy it. And so I think that's definitely getting caught in the Coach Prime media sphere here, because it's just so easy to find stuff to be like, oh, it's negative, it's terrible, it's bad, it's awful, very good, no bad. Just insert every other negative, where I didn't come up with a lot of different ones there. But you get what I'm saying there. I just think that's kind of the way it works now, and you just got to let this stuff play out sometimes.
You just got to roll with the punches. And I think of all the coaches in college football, Coach Prime is probably the one he probably loves the criticism. If we're being honest, he's been criticized his whole career.
I don't think he cares.
That he probably does not care either. I think that's the other
I
fun
think that's
part.
a common misconception, is like fans can influence the sport, yes, but when they're all negative on a particular coach, there are a lot of coaches. Some coaches might care, might bother them. Most coaches be like, I don't care. I'm just going to show up, do my job. Like, Coach Prime is not scrolling through Twitter looking at every single negative response that somebody sends to him. That's not happening.
It's not happening. He's out here to win football games. He's out here to get transfers. We're out here at Locked On Buffs to provide the best content for you every day. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Spencer, we appreciate you for coming on. Go check him out over on Locked On Pac-12 at Smalls55, as you can see below his name. Spencer, thank you again for joining us. You guys have a great day. We will see you guys on Monday.